A few months back, when I was traveling alone in Sicily, I was walking along a road close to the northern coast of the island in a village outside the major cities. A car drove by and it stopped. This was in the middle of the day, but there were not that many people around. I instinctively stayed a couple of meters away from the car. He spoke Italian. I said, "Sorry, I don't speak Italian." Then he took out his phone and showed me a picture. I could see that there was a young woman on a couch in the picture who looked slightly stoned or something, and he said, "I've got money for you." I'm pretty sure that man was a pimp, not someone who wanted to buy sex for himself. He spoke in an almost uninterested way, and it seemed more like he had some kind of system. And also, he had tattoos, a muscular upper body, and he wore gold jewelry. I have never seen a pimp before in real life, but that is how I imagine them. Maybe they go to pimp school, where they learn how to dress. In that short moment, several thoughts went through my mind. Besides the obvious, "Ooh, I still got it," there was this whole comedy thing going on in my head. Most of it came later, but I could feel the comedy starting to emerge already while I was standing there. It went something like this. Come on. I'm not exactly in my early 20s, and I mostly talk about things like Theodore Adorno's philosophy with people I meet. Do you really want that? I mean, I'm sure there's a market for everything, but how would you even go about the marketing? Like, "Hey, I've got this really special girl for you. For $1,000, she'll totally Adorno your brains out." I'm not sure it would make a good sale, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm biased. And the second thing that went through my mind, although mostly after the encounter, was, this is a pimp. That's awful. How do you become a pimp? Did he just decide one day that, yeah, it makes sense? And was there not even one woman in his life that he liked or respected just a little bit? A mother or a friend or maybe a female pet dog? Someone who would make him think for a second that maybe I should not become a pimp. I felt like I wanted to interview him, but the situation dissolved quickly. I didn't speak Italian and he didn't speak English anyway. When he showed me the picture, I just shook my head and continued walking. There were also some construction workers nearby who observed the whole interaction, and when I continued walking, they nodded in my direction and continued with their work. I interpreted it as maybe they knew this guy, and maybe they would have intervened if I had gotten into the car. Only months later did I think about this interaction. Before I go on, a trigger warning. I am going to speak about personal agency from an unexpected angle, and if you've experienced harassment or stalking and feel vulnerable about those topics, this might not be your video. And if you keep watching, please remember that my view doesn't apply to every situation. Try to make space for multiple truths. Months after this incident, videos kept appearing in my feed about how there are creeps everywhere, how someone who is romantically rejected might turn into a stalker or harasser, and how people might feel on alert because they cannot know beforehand who is or isn't a creep. The internet can also be quite polarized around these topics, if you haven't noticed. This video is not about that. What I will examine is how we relate to creepdom in general, both in other creeps and the creep within ourselves. I propose that there is a type of existential desert that most of us will encounter at some point in our lives, and that once you are there, questions about inside safety and outside danger might begin to look different. I arrived at these thoughts after reflecting on those videos and reading through the comment sections. Story after story gave the impression that there are a lot of creeps out there. I thought, wait a minute. A pimp recently tried to recruit me. Is that the type of situation you are supposed to be creeped out about? Instead, I had this whole comedy going on in my head. When I thought about it, I realized that it wasn't only that my understanding of what is creepy seemed to differ from some people's, it was that I could not relate to the assumptions behind some of the stories. They seemed to say, I consider safety and a sense of belonging central goals or values. And then there is the outside world where creeps sometimes intrude that safe space. It sounds reasonable, yet I couldn't relate to it. What I couldn't relate to was how it would feel to possess that space of insider belonging in the first place, and then from that position point out that the outside world can be creepy. I started to wonder whether I am myself in fact a creep, an angry and rejected outsider looking in. I looked up what goes on in those who might end up harassing and stalking. There are several subcategories of stalkers and other perpetrators. Those who are categorized as resentful or insecure and who tend to stalk after rejection are triggered by a social hierarchy that they imagine is there. The perpetrator looks at the target and projects onto them an idealized status, the insider who automatically possesses community and validation. The perpetrator themselves feels inferior and they try to drag down the other person from the assumed pedestal to reduce their power. The harasser's inner world could sound like this. Look at me, I matter too, and if I cannot matter in a positive way, then I will make myself matter to you in any shape or form, until you acknowledge that I exist. Being irrelevant is the ultimate threat. To be clear, when I say that I can understand some of the internal landscape, and maybe many of us do, I do not say that I understand the impulse to harass or stalk at all, nor that it is justified. This topic is difficult to articulate because people have experienced bad things and have very good reasons to be hypervigilant, and it's good that we work to make the world safer and more equal. Yet it is also true that there is something suspicious about the word safety. Making people believe that the outside world is creepy and that inside a community they'll be safe seems like a good way to prevent them from seeing dysfunctions inside the systems they belong to. In addition, perpetrators in most cases operate within communities of belonging, within already existing relationships. Even the concept safety, when presented as the ultimate goal, seems slightly icky to me, almost like it is trying to conceal something that is, in actuality, not safe. For me, true liberation or agency wasn't found by demanding a safer bubble. It was found by stepping outside of the bubble, as I will soon describe. I started unpacking this. I have kept putting myself in potentially dangerous situations over and over again in the past 20 years. Traveling alone to many places, going on long bicycle tours in Central Europe and Scandinavia, bringing my tent with me, putting it up and sleeping at random places, or traveling in the USA, going running in New York in Manhattan at 4 o'clock in the morning due to jet lag. These are not just single occurrences, but a way of life. When people sometimes ask me, "Were you not afraid?" and they do ask me that, the question itself hasn't really resonated with me, not because I am blind to risk, but because I have another relationship to this whole topic. A little bit about my life story. Even if you have a different story, parts of it might still resonate with you, and you might be able to mirror your stories in mine. I moved abroad in my early 20s. I went no contact with my parents shortly after, and as a consequence, with parts of the wider family network. The situation felt so harmful to me that I knew that if I maintained contact, I would not be able to become the person I wanted to be. When you make that choice, you are not choosing something better. You are choosing uncertainty, and you do not know whether there will be more or less suffering. So I moved abroad and found myself a job at a hotel and worked there until I started to study. I built a life from there. That is a challenging way to enter adulthood because you already carry baggage from your past and you are trying to integrate into a future without a support system and without any proof that it will work. And when things go wrong, there is no safety net that you can return to. The connections that come naturally inside the bubbles of belonging are not automatically available to you. I had to actively build connections. I had to be proactive. If I wanted relationships or just a conversation or a place in the world, I had to initiate it myself. Yet if you continue building from that place and you make it work, there is a lot of agency in that and countless positive outcomes. You systematically choose the external world, the unknown, new experiences. You choose curiosity over and over again. It becomes habitual. This way of constantly engaging with new experiences was a deliberate choice, not always a result of feeling curious. I repeatedly pushed myself to do so, also when I didn't feel like it. In that process, the ghosts that you might carry from the past begin to dissolve organically. The past conditioning fades through new experiences and new experience-based learning. And you are building a new version of yourself on a deep somatic level, not just by cognitively understanding new perspectives, which is more common in therapy. If you continue engaging with the world, over time you likely develop a psychological infrastructure that has durability, flexibility, and adaptability. I believe those things cannot be taught in any other way than through experience. In that process, you might also enter what can be called a space of radical individuation, not individualism. They are not the same thing. When you move toward individuation as a result of that radical choice, a whole system around you is internally threatened by you, even if they do not say so. Your leaving reveals the dysfunctions of a system, and this is also true on a societal level. We are not necessarily encouraged to uncover toxicity around us and leave systems behind. Rather, we are encouraged to fix ourselves. And we use words such as trauma and healing about our inner existential journey. I often find those words themselves unappealing. The idea of a soul or inner autonomy has been killed in the Western world around 100 years ago, or maybe 70 years ago. We look at human life through statistical averages, and we generate theories that treat attachment and bonding as primary goals. So when you choose uncertainty rather than stagnant dysfunction, and there are many ways to do so, there is much agency in it, but you will also encounter a lot of gaslighting on an individual level and on a societal level. Nobody likes your individuation. You're expected to stay in a bubble where you seek safety and belonging at any cost, just like everybody else. When you reject that bubble, you choose to become a creep in an existential sense. You enter a world of creepdom. And this is where it gets interesting. I wish I had known this back then. You cannot go backwards in your evolution. For a long time it felt like I was supposed to attach to a new bubble of belonging, and I wondered why it didn't work when I tried to. I wanted to enter systems where I could have that warm and comfortable feeling of belonging automatically. It feels good to belong. But I experienced dysfunction within new systems too. I saw dysfunction with hypersensitivity and hyper-awareness, subtle power plays, hidden resentments, and people controlling each other in toxic ways. I falsely believed that I needed to fix myself so that I could then belong to a bubble. That is incorrect information. When you have left your original dysfunctional bubble, you have left all other bubbles too, and their distinct forms of dysfunction. There is most likely no going back. You see those dysfunctions not because there is something wrong with you, but because there is dysfunction. You see it with clarity because you can afford to see it, because you tolerate being alone, because you tolerate not belonging. Yet for those whose whole identity depends on that bubble, understandably they cannot see the dysfunction clearly. It costs them too much. So after you leave the initial bubble on an existential level and enter creepdom, you cannot successfully create a new bubble as a goal in itself. Not in the same way. It doesn't work that way. You can belong again, but as a byproduct, when you build your way towards completely different goals and do not make belonging the objective. You can not belong together with others. Yet in the end, the idea that there is an insider world and an outsider world is a total illusion. Over time, everyone gets the opportunity to arrive at that same realization. People's realities tend to collapse at some point. Maybe they get divorced in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. Maybe their career collapses, or their teenage children grow up disliking them because they see right through their parents' need for control and underlying insecurity. When their career or marriage dies, they lose their insider status and their cultural position. They are suddenly forced to look at the world from the outside, unanchored, without a manuscript to tell them what comes next. People are suddenly thrown into the exact same existential wasteland that I learned to manage 2 decades ago. And that is good, too. Through crises, people are given an opportunity to examine their matrix. They are led toward individuation and the discovery that maybe they do not need specific things in life to feel okay. And that is where life begins, in my opinion. Returning to those stories about creeps, the ones that were told from the perspective of an insider world, I realized that the reason some of them slightly triggered me was that for a long time I felt like an outsider. I felt like a creep in an existential sense. And I thought I needed to belong to a community or system with strong social bonds to feel okay. Yet it seemed to be out of my reach to do so. But I also came to realize that safety and belonging as primary values do not resonate with me. A lot of it I had adapted from our cultural ideas. I do know they resonate and even feel necessary to many people, and that is okay too. If I try to describe what true safety means to me, it might be the capacity to enter awkward, raw, and uncomfortable situations that lack a manuscript and find it exhilarating to engage with them. And I genuinely do. It even feels like life happens most fully in those situations. The experience is the most concentrated, and playfulness emerges in its best form. I pay attention. I improvise. And if you operate from this form of creepdom agency, it likely has consequences for your interaction with other creeps too. There is a myth that when you come from a place of not belonging, you are more vulnerable to predators. That is not necessarily the case. It is true that some predators look for isolated people who they can control. But that usually happens inside relationships. They are, for example, domestic abusers, cult leaders, or financial scammers. The claim that not belonging always makes you vulnerable might actually be part of the status quo's master plan to make you stay stuck within dysfunctional systems, painting a picture of the external world as dangerous. In some ways, your creepdom might actually offer you a shield. When you yourself know what the shadow feels like, you understand the inner infrastructure of it, you also see it in other people. Consequently, you do not approach situations through a social hierarchy. When talking with strangers or people you know, you most likely do not project an unreachable insider energy. Psychologically, for a resentful or insecure person, there is not that much to project onto. There's not really anything to work with. This is not victim blaming, and obviously it does not apply to every situation. There are many types of perpetrators, and also the fact that all people have a shadow and thus we have that in common should not be romanticized. Second, when you do not outsource your safety to a specific community, it turns into an ongoing internal activity. It is not about being blind to danger, but about continuous risk calculation. Instead of following general rules, I view threat as always contextual and make choices along the way. But in the end, this might not be about how dangerous situations are. It is more about a choice that you have already made when leaving behind the absolute need of tightly belonging to a system. You have already said yes to risk and the unknown, even if things would go south. You'd rather explore reality than find a nice and safe corner for yourself within it. Life on this side of creepdom is not always easy, but it is interesting. And it changes how you experience life to such a degree that you won't even relate to a lot of the common anxieties people have. I recommend Life as a Creep.